Title: Panther Tank vs M4 Sherman, The Deadly Showdown. Inside the M4 Sherman tank, one of the most famous aspects of the Second World War was the introduction of fast-moving maneuver warfare, spearheading lightning-fast advances into enemy territory with high-performance tanks, a far cry from the clunky metal boxes of the First World War. Among the famous tank designs that roamed the battlefield, few are as iconic or as controversial as the American M4 Sherman. By the 1930s, the United States lagged behind other world powers in tank development. As the build-up to war began in Europe, American planners devised the M2 and M3 tanks, vehicles that were hoped to be sufficient for any future conflict. After the outbreak of hostilities, a number of M3 Lees were shipped to Great Britain and renamed the M3 Grant as part of Lend-Lease agreements. Its performance was met with mixed reactions. The M3 was a robust and reliable tank that operated well in the harsh conditions of North Africa, but the positive features of the vehicle ended there. It had a tall profile, making it easy to spot and providing a large target for enemy fire. Another unfortunate aspect of its design was the lack of a rotating turret. The main gun was mounted on a side-positioned sponson with a limited firing arc, which meant that the entire vehicle would have to pivot around to engage targets. With these limitations in mind, American planners used the blueprints of the M3 as well as the M2, but made it larger and more powerful. As early as April 1941, plans for the M4 Sherman were being drawn up, and by September of that year, the first prototype was ready for testing. After a few minor adjustments, the M4 was ready for full-scale production by February of 1942. The Sherman was designed to be simple and easy to mass-produce. Over the course of the war, 11 factories churned out M4s in prodigious numbers. By the time production had ceased, almost 50,000 were made, second only to the Soviet T-34 in sheer volume. Because of the simple nature of the M4's chassis, modifications to the basic design were easy to create, and numerous sub-variants were developed, including more powerful tank destroyer versions, a flamethrower variant, and the chassis was used as the basis for a self-propelled howitzer, a tank recovery vehicle, and a bridge layer. The M4 Sherman is classified as a medium tank, weighing in at around 30 tons, with a length of 19 feet 2 inches, a width of 8 feet 7 inches, and a height of 9 feet. The Sherman was propelled by a Continental R975 C19-cylinder engine capable of producing up to 400 horsepower and could reach speeds of around 30 miles per hour. Later variants were given more powerful engines that could generate up to 450 horsepower. The fuel tank could hold up to 175 gallons of gasoline, giving it a maximum range of around 120 miles. Due to the simple and reliable construction, the M4 could traverse up to 4,000 miles before requiring maintenance, enabling it to stay in the field longer than many other tanks of the era. Should repairs be needed, the simple design meant that the crews could perform basic repairs themselves, rather than needing specialized equipment or dedicated mechanics. The crew of a Sherman consisted of 5 men: the commander, the driver, a co-driver who also operated a machine gun, the gunner, and the loader. The interior of the M4 was spacious compared to many other tanks, and while the conditions were far from luxurious, it was marginally better than most contemporary vehicles. Access came from 4 hatches, 2 located on the front of the hull, another located on the top of the turret, and an escape hatch in the floor behind the driver's seat, which allowed the crew to abandon the vehicle in an emergency. The driver was located at the front left of the hull and steered the tank with a pair of control levers and floor pedals, with transmission controls directly to his right. Vision to the outside was originally provided by a vision slot, but this was replaced by a periscope. Drivers had a limited field of view and relied on the commander for accurate information to steer the tank. To his right sat the co-driver, who also operated one of the 30-caliber machine guns. Should the driver be incapacitated, he would step in as a replacement. Located behind was the gunner, who traversed the turret. Above him were the loader, who selected the appropriate ammunition and loaded the main gun, and the commander, who directed the tank and called out targets for the gunner to engage. The gunner would fire by flipping a firing switch and using a foot pedal. The tank's commander could view the outside world through a mounted periscope, but this limited the field of vision. Many commanders would stick their heads outside the turret for a clearer view, making their position the most vulnerable to enemy fire. Commands were given verbally over an intercom system, but experienced crews would communicate non-verbally, such as the loader tapping the gunner with his foot to indicate a loaded gun, saving valuable seconds on the battlefield. The Sherman was protected by up to 3 inches of steel armor plating, angled to help deflect incoming rounds. The armor was left deliberately limited in order to save weight, making the tank faster and more maneuverable, though sacrificing survivability to do so. The earliest version of the hull was made from cast steel, giving the tank its distinctive rounded appearance, while some later versions were welded. Later versions of the Sherman also featured thicker armor in response to encounters with their German counterparts. Tank crews in the field would often supplement the armor with improvised protection, often in the form of sandbags, cinder blocks, spare track links, or anything else they could find. This type of armor provided limited additional protection, but also strained the suspension and engine. General George Patton forbade this practice, though the troops continued to do it anyway. The first variants of the Sherman to roll off the production line were equipped with a 75mm main gun. This was generally effective against many earlier German tanks, such as the Panzer III and IV, though later tanks such as the Panther and Tiger could easily deflect the low-velocity round, especially against their frontal armor. With the 75mm gun woefully inadequate against more advanced German tanks, a more effective weapon was needed. The British first came up with the idea to equip the Sherman with the much more powerful 17-pounder or 76.2mm gun, leading to the development of the Firefly variant, which had a heavier suspension and an extended turret to accommodate the larger gun. This and other variants, including the E8 or Easy 8, would use a 76mm gun, which had a much higher muzzle velocity and was more than sufficient to deal with German armor. All versions of the Sherman's main gun, with the exception of a 105mm variant, came with a gyro stabilizer. In theory, it allowed the gun to maintain its elevation even as the vehicle bounced along rough terrain. In practice, the equipment was complex, and many crews lacked the proper training to use or maintain it, and many simply didn't use it. In addition to the main cannon, the Sherman was equipped with a pair of 30-caliber machine guns, one located on the right side of the frontal hull, the other coaxial to the main gun. A larger 50-caliber machine gun was mounted on the outside of the turret for both anti-personnel and anti-aircraft capabilities. Due to the vast numbers, reliable and simple design, and ease of production, the M4 was sent to virtually every major battlefront of the war, though the vast majority were used by the Americans. Lend-Lease supply shipments saw Shermans in use by the British, Soviet, Free French, and other Allied armies. China was given 100 of the M4A4 variants by Britain to use against Japanese forces in Burma. Even the Germans made use of a few captured tanks. The Germans also had an extensive history after the war, used as the main battle tank of the American armed forces in the Korean War, as well as by other nations including Israel, Greece, Yemen, Iran, Iraq, India, Pakistan, and a host of others, even into the 1970s. Few tanks are as controversial as the Sherman. Its poor reputation stems from its inadequate performance against German tanks, especially the heavier Panther and Tiger variants. The earlier version, with the low-powered 75 mm gun, proved futile against the frontal armor of these vehicles, forcing tank crews to maneuver for a shot to the side or rear of the enemy, often relying on sheer numbers to destroy the enemy tank from multiple directions. While it is true that the 75mm gun was underpowered for this role, they were continually produced even after the 76mm versions were created. The Sherman wasn't designed as a tank destroyer, but for general purposes. Most engagements that the Sherman found itself involved in were supporting infantry, and its targets were machine gun nests, bunkers, and field artillery pieces, something the 75mm gun was more than capable of dealing with. Another myth involves the nickname of the M4 as Ronson's, after the lighter company who had the slogan, "Lights the first time every time." Ronson did not adopt that slogan until the 1950s, making the reference a post-war fallacy. It is true that earlier Shermans would burst into flame after being hit by the enemy, often launching the turret clear of the hull. This was initially blamed on the engine and the gasoline fuel, which combusts much more readily than diesel. A study performed by the Army soon found that this was not due to the engine, but was due to ammunition stored in the turret, which could set off a chain reaction after being hit. This problem was mitigated by removing the ammunition stored there and adding additional armor plating to ammo storage areas. These and other myths give the M4 Sherman an unearned reputation as an inferior tank. Realistically, it had its flaws and shortcomings, but was a very well-built general-purpose tank that fulfilled its role on the battlefield well. Whether deep in the wilderness or on the battlefields of the Second World War, it pays to be wary of big cats. One of the most legendary tanks of that conflict was the German Panzer V Panther, a vehicle which struck fear into the hearts of the Allies who faced it. While the search for a replacement for the Panzer IV tank began in 1938, the origin of the Panther began after Operation Barbarossa in 1941. In spite of the overwhelming success of the early stages of the invasion, German High Command began to worry about the effectiveness of its Panzer III and IVs against the Soviet T-34s and KV-1s they were encountering. After a careful study of captured T-34s, a competition was set up to produce a new medium tank that could compete with it on the battlefield. Several prototypes were put forward from companies like Krupp, Daimler-Benz, and others. The winning design was a prototype made by Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg, or MN, selected in late 1942. After a few more adjustments, the newly developed tank went into production in January of 1943. It was given the designation of Panzerkampfwagen 5 Panther and was first sent into combat that July on the Eastern Front. Over the course of the war, there were several variants of the Panther. Confusingly, the first to enter production was the Ausf-D, as Ausf being the abbreviation of the German word Ausführung, or version. The next model was the Ausf-A, followed by the Ausf-G. This is in contrast to other German tank designations, where the first type in a production run is given the A designation, then by and so on. The G variant was the last production variant of the Panther to enter combat, though there was an F variant with the updated turret, and a Panther II tank was also planned, though the war ended before either made it to the production line. It was an update of the Ausf-A on a redesigned chassis and had modifications to make production easier and cheaper. The Panzer Ausf-G measures in at 29 feet in length, 11 feet in width, and a height of 10 feet, or 8.86 meters by 3.42 meters by 3.1 meters. The weight of the Panther is 45 metric tons, slightly heavier than the D variant, though still considerably lighter than the Tiger, which weighed in at 54 tons. The Panther was a smaller and more maneuverable alternative to the Tiger series of tanks and was classified by German High Command as a medium tank. Like all versions of the Panther, the Ausf-G had a crew of 5 men, a commander, driver, gunner, loader, and radio operator, who was also a machine gunner. The commander would be located in a cupola at the rear of the turret behind the gunner and loader. The driver would be seated lower in the hull on the left side of the vehicle. To his right would be the radio operator. In earlier versions, the driver would view the world through an armored viewport cut into the hull. In order to mitigate this obvious weak point, the opening was replaced by a single traversable periscope. This had the additional benefit of simplifying the production process. The main gun of the Panzer G, like all the other variants, was a 75mm high-velocity cannon. While this is the same caliber as the main gun of the M4 Sherman, it had a much higher muzzle velocity due to a larger powder charge and longer barrel. This gave the main gun of the Panther excellent armor penetration against Allied tanks. The IUSEF-G carried 82 rounds of ammunition for the main gun, a slight increase over the 79 rounds of earlier versions. The second armament of the If you enjoyed this content, visit our channel for more stories like this. Please like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. Also let us know in the comments where you are watching from.